Welcome to Kassidee Training. In this video we're going to have a look at the Disability Services Minimum Dataset Reporting, or the ADHC reporting as some call it, and have a look at the actual structure that you need to set up in Kassidee to be able to do that reporting. So let's go to Administration, and then you click here on the Resource Setup. So this is the area in Kassidee where you can set up your own resource types, and you actually need to create a number of new resource types plus add some fields to existing resource types. So let's first have a look at some of the existing ones. To the staff resource type or the employee resource type, depending on what you've called it in your version of Kassidee, you need to add a number of fields. You need to add a payment status, and it also has an option list called payment status that goes with it. Let's have a quick look at the option lists as we go. So general option lists, so payment status, and that's simply just got two values in it, paid and unpaid. It's also important to put these values, number 1 and number 2, in the value field, because they're the values that are defined for the Disability Services Minimum Data Set. So let's go back here. So you've added in payment status, also the work phone number and the work fax number. So that's the additions you need to add to the staff resource type. If we then have a look at the client resource type, there are a number of extra fields you need to add there, and you might want to pause this video at any time so you can copy those into your version of Kassidee. But there's a number of fields here: the client portrait, the living arrangements, residential setting, labour force status, the individual fund status, the client weight, ADHC consent, and the carer allowance. You may also want to put an ID, a client ID that comes from the previous system that you were using. In this case we've put the TCM client ID in there. Now there's a few option lists in this one. Living arrangements, let's have a look at that. So lives alone, lives with family, lives with others. Once again, it's important to have these values, value 1, 2 and 3. The values 1, 2 and 3 in the value 1 field. Residential setting. A number of entries there with their appropriate values in the value 1 field. So you might want to pause it there so you can copy those in. And then the labour force status. Employed, not employed and unemployed, or not in labour force, and the relevant values in the value 1 field. And the last one here that's been used is the yes/no option list. It gets used in a number of different places. And it has 4 potential options there with their respective values as well. Okay, so that's what needs to be added to the client resource type. The next resource type that needs to be created from scratch is the carer resource type. So there's the carer resource type. First name, last name, relationship, primary status, residency status, date of birth and carer allowance. And it has some option list values in it as well. It's using the yes/no option list value a few times here, and it's also using the relationship type option list value. So let's look at that. Relationship type. And there's the different relationships with their respective values. The values are actually what's used in the report, so it's very important that that value 1 values get entered in when you're creating these option lists. Okay, so that's the carer, and the carer is actually used as a related resource to the client. So that's how you add carers in as related resources, and we'll have a look at that when we talk about adding the data you need to for the Disability Services MDS or the DS MDS report. So let's have a look at the next one that you need to create, which is called client service. A client service is used to store the particular services that you are giving your client. Once again, it's a related resource to client. It's how you use it. And the field names are service funding status. Funding status is one of the new ones that we'll have a look at in a second. Start date, end date, reason stopped and funding. So there's a couple of resource lists you'll notice in this one. So you need to use, service needs to use the service resource list. Sometimes some groups call that the program. and here's the funded program resource list. There's also another option list here called cessation of service, so let's have a look at that. And you can see the values there in cessation of service and the value 1 numbers. Okay, so that's the client service resource type that needs to be added and is used as a related resource to client. Another one that's also a related resource to client is support needs. You only need one of these per client. These are the specified fields for support need, and they're all option list driven. And let's have a look at the support needs option list. And they're the valid values there for support needs, and once again the value 1 fields. Things like the order, etc. don't really matter. That's up to you which order you want them to be displayed in, but the values do matter. The value 1 field does matter. Okay, that's support needs, and that's the last one that's a related resource to clients. The other resource type that you'll need to create is called service provider. It's a very simple resource type. It only ever has one entry in it, and it's basically your funded agency ID and the current collection end date. So that's a date that you'll change each time you run the ADHC report or the DS MDS report. So that's service provider. The funded program, this is an important resource type. It stores your unique MDS IDs. These are the unique numbers that you've been given for your funding from the government. Service type, and we'll have a look at that option list of type service type shortly. Funding jurisdiction, etc. So these are all the fields you need to set up for your funded program, and you need to have all your funded programs in this resource type for this to work. So let's have a look at the option list service type. Quite a few service types there, so you'll need to just pause the video if you want to type all of these in, and then there's your list of values. You can see that they're decimal point values in this case in value 1. It gives you an idea of what descriptions I've put in there. The description field is just for support purposes really, so when people hover over that field in the resource type they can see what it says. Actually, that doesn't work for option list, so it's just there to help remind you of what that field's all about. So that's the funded program, and then the last one that you need to set up is one called other source of funds. It's only got one field in it. It's got an option list of other source of funds, so let's have a look at that. There's your options and your values. And the other source of funds resource type is used as a related resource for the funded program. So they're all of the resource types that are important for you to have, and the fields in each of those resource types in order to be able to record the information you need to produce the Disability Services Minimum Data Set Report or the ADHC report. You'll also need to store data in the scheduling system, and we'll have a look at that later on when we talk about storing data, but you'll need to store data in the scheduling system as well, and that's actually all of your events. So have a look for another video that talks about how to enter the data, and that should get you on the way then to be able to produce your ADHC report.